Let's look at the latest on the impeachment hearings against Donald Trump. Let's go to Bruce Wolpe, our regular US expert. Bruce, what do we expect this week? The hearings to continue. What's looking like the highlight of those particular hearings?
Good morning, Kieran. There will be 3 days of hearings that begin overnight tonight in Washington. And the key witness really is Gordon Sondland, the EU ambassador, the United States' ambassador to the European Union, a campaign contributor to President Trump, a Trump friend, but who has been caught in his account of whether the president was directly involved in ordering in making a condition of investigations into the Bidens and the Democrats as a part of military aid to Ukraine. So his testimony, which is in a couple of days, will be really, really important. We'll also hear from Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. He is the fellow on the National Security Council who was in dress uniform when he gave his deposition, who listened in on the call and was very concerned and alerted White House lawyers. So there will be more building of the case and a testing of exactly what the president did and said at crucial intervals as the Ukraine affair has unfolded.
The president has sent out a couple of tweets, as is his wont overnight, and suggested, in fact, that he might even consider testifying.
Yes. We may want to not get too excited about the congressional television event of the century, because if you'll recall, President Trump outlined the possibility of testifying in person before Robert Mueller and having a back and forth. Trump's lawyers ultimately pulled him back. I think the same will happen here, but it was a bona fide offer from the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and Adam Schiff, the chairman of the committee, and other members of the committee. They would like to hear from President Trump, and the president says this is an unfair, rigged process. Well, if he has a chance to talk to the committee and the Congress and the American people about what he saw and what he did and the truth and so forth, this is a chance. But it is dangerous territory for him because he would suffer cross-examination. I think there's a fair chance he would respond in writing to questions, but I think, while I believe he'll toy with the idea of a public testimony, which would be kind of huge, I don't think it's going to happen.
Bruce, give us a sense for our viewers who see this and the drama, but it's sometimes hard to get the reality from the theatre here, because we know it's an impeachment hearing, but how likely is it to achieve that goal of impeachment? Because they need to swing a number of Republicans, correct me if I'm wrong, in the Senate if that has any chance to succeed, and there's no sign of them doing that.
That's exactly right, Kieran. They would need to flip 20 Republican senators in order to achieve a supermajority required for conviction on the impeachment charges and removal of the president from office. And no president has been removed under impeachment by action of the Senate. So it is likely to play out exactly as you said. But what the Democrats are, where they're landing under Nancy Pelosi's leadership, is on a readily understandable story of an abuse of power on the one hand, using political motives to color the relationship with Ukraine, and obstructing the work of Congress in terms of not cooperating with the investigation, regardless of whether the president finally testifies or not, but likely not, but on witnesses and documents and so forth. And what they want to make a case, the president is unfit for office, and they believe they can make that case to sustain views by the public as the presidential campaign unfolds. So that's sort of the larger context and drama going on around impeachment, that they can make a case now and it will be relevant as the presidential election plays out.
Speaking of that presidential election, give us a snapshot. Our viewers interested in the presidential race as Trump heads into 2020. How's the Democratic race looking? Is it still a Melbourne Cup field or a Kentucky Derby field?
It's still Melbourne Cup, Kentucky Derby. There's still well over a dozen candidates, and they'll be debating on Thursday morning our time, for the next round of Democratic debates. But it will not have Michael Bloomberg or Deval Patrick, who got into the race. Bloomberg is still weighing it over the last week. It's really on two levels. At the national level, Joe Biden has sustained the attacks of President Trump, the criticism by his fellow Democratic candidates, and he's still topping national polls as seen as the most trusted Democrat, the one who can carry the fight to President Trump. But in the early primary states, it's a different story. And in Iowa, Pete Buttigieg has moved to the top of the pack about 2 months out now from the presidential primary in Iowa. He's very well organized, very well financed, and I do think he has a real chance to break through in Iowa. Elizabeth Warren continues to do well. Bernie Sanders continues to do well. So you have this bifurcated status at the national and then the state levels. But again, if you think about the early primaries, people are going to pay attention to those winners. So if Buttigieg wins in Iowa, say, Elizabeth Warren wins, say, in New Hampshire, a neighboring state to Massachusetts where she's from, that kind of mixes it up and makes it harder for Biden. Where does Biden break through? Is it in South Carolina? Is it in Nevada? Then you go into Super Tuesday. So it is very complicated. All these horses are running, and others back in the pack are looking for their moment of glory to break through as well. People like Amy Klobuchar, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker. So it is mixed up, but right now, that's where it is. They're still hanging in for the moment. As long as they have money and oxygen to breathe, they'll be in there for a little while longer.
Finally, and this is a very big story internationally, I want to get your thoughts on the move by the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, basically to endorse the Israeli settlements. This goes against long-standing US policy. It
does, and it's quite a dramatic move by the Secretary of State and the President on this front. It's been warmly welcomed in Israel, of course. It has been received with hostility by the Palestinians, that to be expected. I would expect European nations and others who have been involved in the peace process over the decades to also have strong reservations. I think President Trump wanted to. There's a complex situation unfolding in Israel on who's going to be prime minister in elections, and Benny Gantz, who came in second in the overall voting, is trying to form a government now after Netanyahu failed to form a government in the first round. And that deadline expires on Wednesday, and then there's another 21-day period. So Israel's in flux. Trump is also trying to make a point to American Jews and how they vote. And this is a play for their support, but I don't think it will be effective on that front. Jewish Americans vote Democratic 70-75% ratio. That will be maintained. But this will also split the Democratic Party, which is another Trump interest. And I think a lot of Democratic presidential candidates will be quite critical of what Trump did on diplomacy. So I think that's how that's going to play out domestically. But internationally, it is very controversial, will heat up the situation, and you'll have a lot of conflict and a lot of argument about it. And ultimately, the Australian government, too, will make its views known as to how it feels about this and the prospects for, ultimately, a two-state solution, if that is still the goal.
But it's not entirely out of the blue, is it? Because this has been where Trump is heading, and it seems to me an attempt, and I think Pompeo might have said this in his news conference, to basically counter the Obama administration's decision to abstain from one particular vote against Israel. Normally, the US would veto votes against Israel. The Obama administration didn't on one occasion. I think this, in part, is an attempt to reverse that, isn't it?
That's exactly correct, Kieran. That was a vote on a resolution on Israeli settlements in the Security Council in December of 2016 as President Obama was exiting office. And throughout his foreign policy, Trump has wanted to reverse where Obama was, from the Paris peace agreements to the Iran nuclear deal and to the Middle East. And what we've seen from President Trump are a series of decisive unilateral moves to support certain objectives with respect to Israel, the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital, the recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and now this decision on its view and treatment of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. So, and the question is, what is the means to the end? Does this advance peace? And Trump's message and Pompeo's message to the Palestinians is, this boat, if it hasn't sailed, it's really out of the harbor. And do you really want peace? And do you really understand that this is the time to negotiate if you want to find a way? But I think the hostility is such that will not prove to be a fruitful road for them. But that is what they're saying to the Palestinians as they shore up the Israeli position on these questions.